If you're stuck in shuffle land with your blues rhythms, then this video is going to help. I'm going to show you how to inject some fun rhythms and bluesy chords into your jam so that you don't just keep playing the same old pattern over and over. There's really so much more than we can do. Real quick before we get started, check out the lesson page that I've linked below. I've got additional lesson resources, including some tab snippets that I think you might find helpful when it comes to mastering this material. And while you're on the site, be sure to sign up for the Tuesday Blues newsletter. It's chock full of tips and diagrams and tabs to really help you nail these lessons each and every week. All right, let's move on to the lesson and talk about the first thing that will really help you out when it comes to leaving shuffle land behind. The standard blues shuffle pattern teaches us to play eighth notes throughout the progression. And while that's a fantastic place to start, it kind of lacks one thing that is really important: space. When we add a little bit of space, just by holding out a chord or just simply muting it and shutting it off, it creates a little room in the groove. And we can use that room for another instrument or for vocals or even just to let the rhythm cook a little bit. Here's an example that mixes some short and long rhythms. We'll talk about when you can play the chords for a really cool effect in just a bit, but before we get there, can you feel the space in this example? We've got that space that's created by doing some long and short and not just strictly playing eighth notes on every single beat. This is where things really start to get a lot of fun, and especially when you combine it with the next tip that I've got for you. All right, we could take this one chord and move it up the neck to D7 and then even to E7 throughout the progression when that chord comes up. Kind of like what I did in the first example, but let's do something a little bit different. Let's stay pretty much in one position. To do that, we're going to have to start mixing some chord shapes. Let's start here with the seventh chord shape. This is one that I used in the very first example, and to me it really looks like a D major chord. We just shifted up a string set, that's up in direction, so that we're on 4, 3, and 2, and we move that up to the 5th fret. But what's cool about this is it's functioning as an A7, but without an A. The root is being taken care of by the bass. If you're playing with another guitar player, you can lean on that, and you just need these two tones really to get the essence of the chord. That's the flat 7 and the major 3rd. But we're throwing that 5th on top just to round it out and get a nice 3-note voicing of this. All right, so you saw me take this and move it up here to the same shape, but now just from D. And by the way, you got to know where your root is, and the root is here, right? So we're playing the flat 7, that's a full step below the root. So if we're visualizing things, there's the root. So we know to take this shape 2 frets below the D. Same thing, take it 2 frets below the E, and we've got an E7. But when it comes to mixing the shapes, things get really fun. So we can take this shape and count that as 1, but let's definitely pick another one and try to keep it nearby. One that comes to mind is the A shape. If you're familiar with caged, this would be an E shape coming from this chord, or an A shape. And just like before, I like to pare this down and play just 3 notes from the chord. So here I've got my A note on the 4th string, 7th fret, the C note on the 3rd string, 5th fret, and then the F sharp, that's on the 2nd string on the 7th fret as well. So it forms this little shape. We get a nice sort of essence of the 7th chord happening, right? Just like we boiled it down to this, we're boiling the A shape down to this, right? And then what's cool about this is once you get to the D chord, you just slide up 2 frets to get your A. So when we start mixing shapes, what I like about this, what it really enables you to do, is kind of stay close. And what's kind of hidden with that is when you stay in position and change chords, some tones are moving by like half steps at a time. Watch this on the 3rd string. That moves down by a half step. Right? So you get some really cool movement when you do that. And of course you can do this with other shapes as well. Let's take another one. If we come up here and play an A with this D shape, again thinking from Cage, there's D, but if we drop the root down a whole step, we've got a D7, but really it's way up here, so this is an A. There's the root, keep your eye on that, right? So we can take this and play our A7 parts. And then if we're looking for something that's nearby, we might choose this voicing of a D7, right? It's really, think of it as your A7, just come up here, your root's on the 3rd string. And then we might throw in the E7 here, just 2 frets up, okay? So really pay attention to how these chords sound together. You can tell they all kind of belong together. The tones are moving, but they're kind of next to each other. That's because we're using this positional way of thinking about changing our chords. Instead of playing A here and taking this whole shape and moving it up into D here and then into E here when it rolls around. That to me is very linear, and it's kind of brute force changing the chords, but if we change to a different shape, we can really get some interesting sounds happening. You can easily expand this idea in a couple different ways. You can mix 2 or more shapes for each chord in the progression. So in other words, maybe you change from this D7 to this D7 shape in the middle of a bar. That's a fun thing to do, and it gets you moving around the neck and starts to really feel like you're improvising. And of course, you can just introduce more shapes, as we're going to see in the next example. But before we get to that, let's talk about something that's been happening throughout the entire lesson, and it's something that can really help you take your rhythmic chops to the next level. I didn't think a whole heck of a lot about syncopation until I got into ragtime blues on my acoustic guitar, and that style is full of syncopation, just accenting beats where you wouldn't necessarily expect it. But let's give this a shot over a 12-bar blues. Really pay attention to when I accent things that are off the beat, on the upbeat, in between the beats. That's getting into this idea of syncopation. It creates a lot of rhythmic variety, which really helps your parts stand out. Here's a quick tip that will get you in the syncopation game, and we can relate it back to something that you probably learned early on in your guitar journey. If you think about your basic strumming pattern, something like this. Got downstrokes and then some upstrokes, right? And those upstrokes are happening sort of in between the downs. Those are the off beats. If we were to count this out, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, 2, 3, and 4. Notice that the ands are when I'm strumming up. We can take that natural tendency to want to play on the beat, the 1, 2, 3, 4 with downstrokes, and the offbeats with upstrokes. We can take that and apply it to these really cool chord stabs in the blues. Let's take a look. Let's get in the game of syncopation around this A7 chord. Although you could use any chord voicing here, the rhythm is what matters, and we're going to stick to that idea of playing downstrokes on the beats. 1, 2, 3, 4, and you could chop it. 2, 3, 4. That sounds really good. 3, 4 works well against the track that we've got going here as an example. And then our offbeats, they're going to be upstrokes. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Take a minute to just do that with a count to get used to that playing on the offbeat rather, and relate it back to this idea of just strumming, right? 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, right? But also chop those chords a little bit too, just to keep them nice and punchy for what we're doing here. So we've got something like this could come out of this idea. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. All right, now I tossed a little downstroke in there. That's totally cool to do once you get the hang of it, especially if you're having a hard time with it. Try to focus on just the upstrokes on the offbeat and then come back and you'll do things like this to keep it nice and rhythmic. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4. Those are both downstrokes. 4 and 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1. Right? So you can absolutely play downstrokes with these. That's not to restrict you, it's just to get you in the game of playing and accenting something on the offbeat. You can see how playing even just a few 7th chord shapes versus chugging along to the shuffle pattern can really help you stand out. The thing is, there's so many chords as you can play to add a little life to your blues parts, not just 7th chords. Watch this video next to go beyond that basic 7th chord idea and add some extra spice to your blues jams. I'll see you there. Until then, practice smart and play on.